Hello, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We are happy to have you with us. It's going to be a very fun show. Connor Riley going to stop by. We're going to recap the NFL draft storylines that emerge in the aftermath of that. We'll enjoy that. Normally it's Jake Fromm on Tuesday. We'll catch up with Jake again here very soon. But one of the things we will talk about, two things actually that are pretty important. Actually, let's say three things here. Interesting recruiting update on five-star quarterback Dylan Raiola before we're done on today's show. That'll be a good time. There was a thing yesterday that a lot of Georgia fans were kind of laughing about, having some fun with. We will also have some fun with that ourselves here today, give you a chance to kind of know what the joke is with Georgia fans today as they look at the Alabama Crimson Tide. But off the top, there were some Georgia fans who've been a little bit upset in the aftermath of the NFL draft. And for those that live in Georgia, they are upset with the local NFL team. I'm going to talk about what the Atlanta Falcons can do to kind of get back in the good graces of Georgia fans here a little bit. It seems like that's not necessarily what's going on here right now. We'll have a fun conversation about that, interesting conversation maybe, off the top of our program today. We are really happy to have you with us. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Let me tell you a quick story to begin today's show. A couple of years ago, actually been more than a couple of years ago now. It's way back like 2004, 2005. So we're talking about almost 20 years ago now, which is hard to believe, but nonetheless. Actually been 05, 06. I forget the exact year, whatever it was, that Michael Vick and the Atlanta Falcons went to Philadelphia to play in the NFC Championship game. I attended that game up there at what do they call it, the Link up there in Philadelphia, the stadium, and remarkable to be in a hostile road environment like that. And Philadelphia sports fans have always had kind of a reputation of, kind of creating a house of horrors in their local venues for, games of this magnitude. And I can tell you, as a Falcon fan there in the building that day, it was, pretty brutal. And a lot of people getting kicked out and thrown in jail. And it was just kind of a madhouse. And it sort of created a situation, even though, the Eagles sort of beat up on the Falcons there that day, it kind of creates a situation that for a good long while now, for pro football fans who are Falcons fans, they've sort of looked at the Eagles, not so much as a rival because they're not in the same division, but they have played in the playoffs a few times. They've had a couple of high-profile regular season games, very different cultures, the sort of Northeast culture of Philadelphia, the sort of down-south culture of Atlanta, very different culturally. And Falcons fans, for the most part, have never really liked Eagles fans. Having been there at the Link there in Philadelphia for that particular game, I can tell you how objectionable at times those Philadelphia Eagles fans can be. We did not get Southern hospitality when we traveled up there those many years ago to watch the Falcons, what turned out to be a loss to the Eagles. My reason for telling that story is the backdrop of all of that has what's made the last few days after the NFL draft seem all the more remarkable to me because of the momentum that has built so quickly for these Georgia fans who have embraced so heartily the Philadelphia Eagles in light of the fact that we talked about Howie Roseman yesterday. Roseman was quoted by one of his, coaches or whatever. They asked him, he traveled and attended a Georgia practice and came back and said, "Who did you like?" He said, "I don't know. I like the entire defense." And, Nick Sirianni, the Eagles coach, after the first round of the draft, when he drove into the Eagles facility that next day, reportedly was like saying, "Go Dogs" to the reporters that were gathering there, getting ready to cover the next day of the NFL draft. And there's a lot of examples of that the Philadelphia Eagles have just so firmly embraced the Georgia Bulldogs, and in return and in kind, Georgia fans have so firmly embraced the Philadelphia Eagles. You've seen a lot of the social media stuff about the Eagle Dogs or the Philadelphia Bulldogs or, all the different incarnations that is sort of taken. And as someone who has been a Falcons fan, to think that, down here in Georgia, this many folks would embrace a sports team from Philadelphia, I find that to be remarkable. And obviously a lot of this kind of stems from frustration with the Falcons, the fact that they did not take Jalen Carter at number 8 overall. Now, let me say something here for a minute. I want to try to understand both sides of this particular discussion. Like, on the one hand, there are a lot of NFL people who don't really get college football who would look at this and say, y'all, the Falcons can't make a draft pick on the basis of public relations. They can't just choose a player because that's the player that played for the local college team. That's a great way to get fired. You're putting on the fast track to get fired if that's what you do. And in a manner of speaking, and certainly a line of thought, you can understand how that could be true. But on the flip side of that, here's the one thing I always want to express on behalf of Georgia fans. After all, we are the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We take it seriously to sort of express the opinion of fans on a show like this. Here's the one thing I think that has to be understood about this. One of the reasons why so many Georgia fans are so frustrated with the Falcons is because even though this spans generations and, a multitude of different kind of GMs and leadership in the Falcons, Georgia fans have seen Georgia players not selected by Atlanta many times in the past, and there are lots of examples in which that's turned out to be a huge mistake. Go back and think about the Falcons taking Vic Beasley in the draft a few years ago, the edge rusher who really kind of turned out to be one of the big busts for Atlanta. They would have had a chance to take Todd Gurley in that same draft, and Gurley went on to be one of the very best players in the entire NFL for a good number of years, probably the best offensive player in the league, certainly for a number of years. He would have looked great in a Falcons uniform. Atlanta didn't select him. That's not the only time when that's been true. Think about, go back to late 90s. Atlanta needs a wide receiver right there on that third-round spot. They take Jamie German, yet a couple of picks later, Hines Ward goes. Ward goes on to have one of the great careers in recent NFL history. German is a guy that no one even really remembers. That's an example of Atlanta missing on the Georgia player who turned out to be great. Many years before that, Falcons needed a running back. You go back to the late 80s, or I guess the beginning of the 1990s. They take Steve Broussard out of Washington State, someone that no one's ever heard of. Could have taken Rodney Hampton, who went on to do big things with the New York Giants. I believe he is in their team Hall of Fame for the career that he had there in New York. And there are other examples you could cite there as well. I had a chance to draft Geno Atkins, for instance. I took a different defensive lineman instead. You could cite other examples of this. So the idea that Georgia fans are frustrated with the Atlanta Falcons for not selecting Georgia players, even if you say Atlanta's going to make the best pick for it, Georgia fans have lived many, many years with the idea of a Georgia player being a good fit or a better fit for Atlanta than the player that it drafted, even sometimes at the same position, and yet ultimately just didn't really quite work out. So there's a lot of history, a lot of backstory here when it comes to Georgia and the Falcons organization. For those who live in the state of Georgia who would like to cheer for the local football team, they're frustrated by the fact that their local team has not drafted enough of these Georgia players over the years. So here's my question. So what do you do about this? What do you do about this? As I said before, I do take it seriously, the idea that Atlanta shouldn't just make draft picks because of the fact that they're Georgia players. They got to make different evaluations than that. But at the same time, Georgia fans, I don't think should have to apologize for the fact that they just simply like Georgia football better than they like Falcons football. They like college football better than they like the NFL. And if the Atlanta Falcons were smart, I believe they would do a whole lot more to reach out and kind of have some outreach and some, friendlier relations with this gigantic pocket, hundreds of thousands, if not, a surplus of 1 million Georgia fans who live in the state who might be interested in also cheering for the local football team there as well in the NFL if Atlanta would just simply do more to reach out to them. Now, let me give you a couple of examples of how this sort of works out. Sometimes this kind of stuff happens on social media a little bit where, the local team might step up and support another local team. Like, for instance, when Georgia's been going for national championships the last couple of years, that kind of creates an opportunity to kind of give the really positive message of, hey, we're here for you. To the Falcons' credit, they did do some of that prior to the national championship. In fact, if you're watching on video, I'll show you this on the screen. Atlanta sending the message of, good luck in the national championship. You get the Falcons logo side by side with the Georgia logo. The Falcons saying on Twitter that they are for Georgia. But by comparison, another pro sports team in Atlanta, I would say, has done a whole lot more in terms of outreach when it comes to the Dawgs, that being the Atlanta Braves. So that's the message, if you're watching on video, that the Falcons sent before Georgia played for the national championship. But look at the stuff that the Braves did. Starting prior to the national championship, they kind of turned the red lights on at Truist Park. Now the Dawgs never get to use their LED lights for a night game because they'll never have one. But in honor of the Dawgs, the Braves turned their lights on, turned them red to wish the Dogs luck before the national championship. Hashtag Go Dogs, they said. Hashtag national championship with the red LED lights ringing the stadium there at Truist Park. That to me sort of looks like an extra step that the Braves are taking that the Falcons sort of didn't take. And then after the national championship was done, it wasn't just some sort of, kind of form letter, congrats on the national championship. No, you got Blooper and Harry Dawg kind of standing there hugging each other. Congratulations, Georgia football. Confetti raining down on another national championship. To me, that's an example of what the Braves, I think, do quite a bit, which is reach out even more to Georgia than the Falcons have kind of ever done. You had Stetson Bennett, who was throwing out the first pitch before the home opener this year. You had Jordan Davis doing some similar kind of stuff a year ago. They have Georgia-themed night at Truist Park every year. They have the co-branded, Georgia Braves hats that they sell there at the clubhouse store. And obviously they do that for a lot of different colleges there as well. But that's kind of the point. is that Braves country sort of stretches beyond the state of Georgia. There are a lot of Braves fans who are not Georgia fans because they live in the Carolinas, they live in Alabama, they live in Mississippi, or they live in Tennessee, somewhere else like that. And yet, even still, the Braves have sort of chosen to, I think, do outreach to Georgia fans in a way that the Falcons kind of haven't. I think it's smart that the Braves do that because there is no doubt that the Georgia football fan base is the largest fan base in this entire state. You can do a show like DawgNation Daily every single day. You'd have a hard time doing, Falcons Daily every single day. There's not enough fans to support it necessarily, at least by comparison. So doing something to reach out to these fans more is something I think the Atlanta Falcons probably ought to do, especially in light of the fact that when the draft happens, when the Falcons don't draft a Georgia player, these Georgia fans get so upset about that. What that tells me is that the Georgia fans are only interested in the Falcons to the extent that the Falcons are interested in UGA. So showing throughout the year that you are interested in this huge pocket of Georgia fans who live in our state, I think kind of makes some sense. Now, I brought this up yesterday to Jon Stinchcomb. John's a lifelong Georgian. In his NFL career, he played for the hated rival of the Falcons, the New Orleans Saints. But nonetheless, he's an observer of some of what's kind of gone on here. And in light of Jalen Carter not being taken 8th overall, in light of a lot of Georgians now saying my favorite NFL team is the Philadelphia Eagles because of all the Georgia players the Eagles have, I asked Jon Stinchcomb what he makes of all of this. This is what John said yesterday.
It's one of those things where Georgia is producing such great talent, and you have the professional team, and as a fan, it would make it a heck of a lot easier for me to track and travel and follow some of these players that I love if they go to our hometown team, especially when they're talented. And, there was an opportunity for the Falcons with that pick to bolster their team with a product that we're familiar with in Jalen Carter, because we know he's going to be a game wrecker wherever he ends up. And, man, that would be really convenient for us. Sadly, I don't think that's what the discussion centers around in any war room as to what's convenient for fans. But I think building rapport and solidifying a base of fandom makes a lot of sense, especially when it lines up well.
And that's the point I'm trying to make here. If you don't want to draft Jalen Carter, that's sort of your business. You better hope he doesn't turn into, the next great defense lineman in the NFL, because that'll just be another example of a pick the Falcons got wrong if that be the case. But if you choose not to draft a guy like Carter, knowing that's what Georgia fans want, then you better have an idea of what your other outreach plan is. How do you plan on reaching these hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Georgia fans who live in our state, who love college football on Saturday, and have taken a little bit of a casual relationship with you because maybe you've taken a little bit of a casual approach to reaching out to them? Jon Stinchcomb talked more about that in terms of how the NFL draft plays out and how Georgia fans think about the Falcons yesterday as well.
I don't want to lose sight of the fact that I don't think there's a bias against the University of Georgia. I think Falcons last year proved that in drafting two of our own. And, I hope for nothing but the best for all those. But, I get it. It might be easier to cross-pollinate a little bit. I know the Braves have a good relationship with DawgNation and Georgia football, and having spoken directly with a number of folks with the Falcons, they certainly aren't opposed to what's going on in Athens and are very supportive of it.
And I believe John on that. I don't think the Falcons organization are bad people, and I don't think they have any intentional bias against UGA. I just simply think they haven't done enough. You go to look back through the annals of history. The original Falcons owner was Rankin Smith. If you go to University of Georgia, kind of right next to the practice field and the indoor practice facility is that academic building. It's the Rankin Smith Academic Center. This is a guy who is deeply connected to UGA. A lot of people may know this, that the reason why the Falcons wear red and black uniforms is tied to the Smith family's ties to UGA many, many decades ago. I think reminding Georgia fans of that history, reminding Georgia fans of that long-time connection between pro sports in Atlanta and college sports there in Athens, I think reminding Georgia fans of that would be a really good thing. If you didn't want to draft Jalen Carter 8th overall, I guess that's your business. Just you better hope he didn't get it wrong. But if you want to do the best possible business you can do, the other 364 days of the year, maybe reaching out to Georgia fans a little bit more and making sure that Georgia fans know that the Falcons love UGA the way that any in-state program should, that might be a good idea. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And we're glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us. 945, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. On the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them. Apple, Spotify, worldfamousdawgnation.com, all kinds of places we post the show. We just try to make it as accessible for you as we possibly can. We really appreciate all of you who tune in and choose to be a part of that with us here today. And as I said before, great friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, they make it all possible. You know, they're proud partners of UGA. They show great support for the Dogs, but they also show great support for you when you're dealing with, as a homeowner, one of the more challenging situations you might be facing. You see water coming in where it's not supposed to be. Maybe this is when it rains. There are signs, there are remnants in the basement, the crawl space, the garage, things like that you just got a water intrusion problem. Or you get out of the basement, maybe you have one of those concrete floors down in your basement, you see that unsettled flooring, you see that crack down there in the foundation, or up in the upper part of your house, you may see cracks in the walls, things like that. That can obviously be a sign of a foundation issue, a real problem that needs to be seen about. And that's why you want to reach out to my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. They are, after all, a solutions-based company. What that means is they want to solve your problem, whether it be foundation, waterproofing. They want to do that for you. They got an entire team of engineers on staff. They're the only ones in our marketplace that can say they have that kind of resource level devoted to your problem, whether it be foundation, whether it be waterproofing, whatever it is. They want to put those guys to work and gals to work for you, doing great stuff for you. So why don't you give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. It's a very easy number to remember, and that phone call starts you on a path to solving your foundation, your waterproofing problems. That is what Engineered Solutions of Georgia is all about. Longtime, loyal friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily, proud partners of UGA as well, so make sure you check out Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, we've got a great giveaway that we're a part of here right now, celebrating our moms. I'm going to tell you more about that here coming up in just a moment before we bring on Connor Riley today. Before that, though, I do want to go around the Dawghouse. And there is something that some Georgia fans have had some fun with over the course of the last 24 hours. And I don't know if this is true or not. This is one of those things that somebody says they heard. But nonetheless, it certainly gotten the attention of Georgia fans, and it kind of gives us a good laugh here today in the aftermath of the NFL draft and kind of looking at all the top teams in the SEC and around college football, trying to replenish their rosters and sort of figure out what's next. And so the website On3, you may have heard of that. They got one of their video guys who was relaying a message that he had heard from people sort of close to Alabama, and you better believe that Georgia fans were laughing about this yesterday. Let me show this on the screen here for a moment, and I'll kind of tell you what the fuss was about here. The guy named, I think his name, J.D. Pickle, I believe is how you say his name. Do we have that? Can we show this? Yeah, here we go. So Athens Steve shared this with me, and he kind of gives me the laughing emoji about this. So this is what J.D. Pickle says he heard about the Alabama quarterback situation. Remember, Tyler Buchner brought in as the Notre Dame transfer. He says, this is Pickle from On3. What I was told about this quarterback situation as a whole with bringing in Tyler Buchner was that Alabama was looking for their Stetson Bennett. Now, isn't that funny? After all these Alabama fans for such a long time have kind of made such a big deal about, Georgia only had the walk-on quarterback and Alabama had the first-round guy, and they had this great pedigree at quarterback, and everybody wanted to be at Alabama. You couldn't touch the Alabama talent. All of a sudden, Stetson Bennett actually goes out and wins 2 national championships, and Bryce Young, despite being the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft, never won anything of note, lost 2 regular season games a year ago, and all of a sudden, according to the guy from On3, Alabama's like, okay, we don't have Bryce Young anymore. We didn't win a national championship with him. Now we don't even have him. So I guess we better go out. We hope we can find our Stetson Bennett. So therefore, we'll take this transfer from Notre Dame, and maybe he can come in and beat out Jalen Milroe or Ty Simpson, and maybe he may not be great. He may not be a first-round quarterback, but maybe he can be our version of Stetson Bennett. You better believe Georgia fans have been loving every minute of that, and it's kind of an example lately of what Alabama fans have sort of been hearing, kind of getting used to the idea that Alabama, at least from a perception standpoint, and 2 regular season losses will do this for you, missing the college football playoff will do this for you. From a perception standpoint, Alabama just kind of isn't what it was. Now, that doesn't mean, I told her our video on it before our show started today. On our Dog Nation cruise that we were just on, had a lot of great conversation with a lot of UGA fans. I really enjoyed those. One of the things that I did notice a lot is, in talking Georgia football with a lot of Georgia fans, there were a good number of fans on that cruise that I would say have sort of kind of come to the belief that Alabama is no longer a factor for Georgia in terms of winning a national championship, that Alabama is not going to be there as an obstacle at the end of the season, that it's more likely to be an LSU or in the college football playoff Ohio State. It doesn't seem like right now, based on some of the personal face-to-face interactions I've had as of late, it does not seem like a lot of Georgia fans are all that worried about Alabama as it stands right now. I'd say be careful with writing them off too quickly in terms of being a contender here this season, but in terms of the larger perception that clearly there's something different about Alabama now than there has been in the past, You can't help but notice that. The idea that Buckner is hopefully their Stetson Bennett is an example of that. Paul Feinbaum, who I think over the years has been kind of a mouthpiece for the Nick Saban Alabama regime, was on WJOX sports radio station in Birmingham earlier this week. I want to read you a quote from the Feinbaum interview on WJOX, kind of furthering the idea that Bama has to get used to a situation in 2023. Transfer portal is closed now. You've gotten all you can get, where the roster just looks a little bit different than it has looked in the past. Feinbaum saying, as good as Alabama's roster is, and it may very well be the second best roster in college football, but it's all about keeping up with Georgia now. Do you know how heavy those words land? I mean, Paul Feinbaum had made a radio career out of telling Alabama fans how great the program was. All of a sudden, even Paul Feinbaum now has to say it's all about keeping up with Georgia now. And, of course, that's true. Georgia won the last 2 national championships. Alabama watched the college football playoff on TV a year ago. Of course it's about keeping up with Georgia. But now even Paul Feinbaum is saying that. Now even the guy that sort of exists to tell Bama fans what they want to hear, even he's forced to say that now. Feinbaum goes on to say about Kirby Smart that he's not only recruiting talent, he's developing and keeping talent. Staggering numbers in terms of the total number of players that Georgia has put in the NFL draft over the course of the last 2 years, with 25 being drafted, and really the entirety, the full picture of the Kirby Smart era thus far at Georgia. And man, those words are so painful for Alabama fans. And when you talk about a quarterback being Alabama's version of Stetson Bennett, they hope, those words very funny for Georgia fans. That's kind of the state of the game here right now. Now, listen. This fall, Alabama's going to try to do something about this. And obviously Nick Saban's a great coach, certainly has been. And even with the attrition off the Alabama roster, there is still a thought they'll be, a formidable presence. So just because you look like the better team in the offseason, that doesn't mean you'll be the better team at the end of the season. After all, last year, Alabama looked like the better team during the offseason. And obviously we know how it played out during the year. So I'd warn Georgia fans, don't get too cocky about this. Don't plant the flag before the battle is won necessarily. But it's okay to laugh at this, too. It's okay to kind of have some humor. But the notion that Alabama fans are very uncomfortable right now about an off-season conversation taking place around Tuscaloosa that is far different than the one they're used to, including guys like Paul Feinbaum weighing in on that. We'll make that around the Dawghouse here today. And before we bring on Connor Riley, let me also remind you of something that we're doing here right now at DawgNation.com. We're coming up on Mother's Day, and around here on DawgNation Daily, we love our families, and we love the kind of bedrock role that our moms play in making our families everything they can be. So we want to celebrate our perfect moms who just seem to do everything sort of perfect, just right, maybe not always what we want, but exactly what we need. That is what our moms are all about. And coming up after a perfect season for these dogs, we're going to celebrate some perfect moms coming up on Mother's Day. In fact, you get a chance right now to kind of nominate a mother in your life, whether it's your wife who's a mom, your own mom, you see your children in some cases becoming moms, or whatever your story is on all of that. Great way to celebrate some great moms who are in our listening audience right now, or as we call them, perfect moms, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. So for each one of our perfect mom winners, we're going to have a week's worth next week, 5 of those, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week. We're going to have a week's worth of those next week. They're going to get a chance to win $350 worth of gift cards. I'm talking about a $150 Kroger gift card, a $100 gift card to Macy's, and a $100 gift card to Bath & Body Works there as well. So all you have to do is go to the top of the page at DawgNation.com. There'll be a link right there up top, and simply click in that and very quickly and easily tell us why the mom in your life should be recognized as one of our perfect moms next week as we give those out right here on DawgNation Daily. Kroger, a great friend of ours, great supporters of all the moms in our audience. And don't forget, also, as you're getting stocked up for Mother's Day, gift cards, greeting cards, big fun meal, flowers, all that kind of stuff. Whatever you got planned for Mother's Day coming up, our friends at Kroger got you covered on all of that there as well. So you can check out Kroger.com/Mother's Day for more on that. That is Kroger.com/Mother's Day for more on that. And go to DawgNation.com, register the mom in your life for a chance to be recognized as one of our Kroger Perfect Moms next week. Any questions about that? Hopefully not. All right, so before we're done, a couple of more interesting notes around the SEC, including a very different take on the Alabama quarterback situation. We'll give you that coming up here in just a little bit. Also, an update to give you, important note on 5-star quarterback Dylan Raiola. We'll share that with you before we are done today there as well. But prior to that, a lot of aftermath here of the NFL draft, a lot of discussion about, kind of where things stand with the Georgia Bulldogs after populating a whole bunch of NFL rosters with a bunch of former Dogs. Let's cover all of that right now as welcoming Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
One of the most common questions I got on our DawgNation cruise last week is, how come y'all didn't let Connor Riley come? And what I told people over and over again was, listen, Connor Riley wouldn't miss the NFL draft for anything in the world, even though we had a great draft party on that Thursday night. Connor wants to immerse himself in everything as it relates to NFL draft coverage. He's just simply not going to miss. I'm getting a little bit of echo here. I don't quite know what's going on there on that. But getting a little bit of now we'll see him get that fixed and figured out. But Connor's not going to want to miss that NFL draft coverage, and he did a great job for it on DawgNation.com. So, Connor, congratulations on a great week. Certainly enjoyed reading everything you were putting out there. You were my way of kind of following a lot of what was going on there. So, appreciate the work that you did, and I'm glad to have you on the program here today.
Yeah, thanks. Bummed I didn't get a chance to head out on the cruise last week, but by all accounts, everyone there had a fantastic time.
Your presence was
glad to hear that well.
Yeah, your presence was definitely missed. One of the things we heard so much was they want you on the next DawgNation cruise. So we'll see if we can figure that out sometime in the future. But obviously, there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the NFL draft. Let me bring you in, though, as kind of a non-Falcon fan on the topic I was having a little earlier, and then we'll kind of get to some of those stuff after that. So here's my point, Connor. If the Falcons don't want to draft Jalen Carter, they have every right to make whatever pick they think is right for them. But if Georgia fans don't want to care about the Falcons, they sort of have every right to do that there too. And I live in the city of Atlanta. I've lived in Georgia my entire life. I'll tell you that the Georgia fan relationship with the Atlanta Falcons is a little bit soft. It's a little bit, kind of whatever. I've seen huge numbers of Georgia fans this week kind of talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. That's the idea I would never would have imagined being true because, the typical Atlanta sports fan doesn't always love, the Philadelphia sports fan necessarily. But it just sort of goes to show you that there's not much of a deep relationship, I would think, between many Georgia fans and, the Atlanta Falcons organization. So kind of what I said before you joined us is, hey, if you're not going to draft Dogs, you better find out some other way to outreach to these Georgia fans because right now they don't care very much about you. You're not a Falcons fan, but you do live here in the Atlanta area. What do you think about the relationship between Georgia fans and the NFL team that happens to reside in the state?
So I think the issue here has been impacted by two things. One, the Falcons just have not been very good in recent years. This is their third straight draft in the top 10. This is also their third straight draft where they're picking a skill player. And I think when you combine that, and again, they pass on Jalen Carter, that's fine. A few years ago they took a defensive lineman instead of taking a skill player from the University of Georgia, and I don't think that worked out correctly. And so, maybe they're trying something different there. But the problem, especially when it comes to the Eagles are far and away the best team in the NFC. Yeah. And they, quite honestly, have built their team the same way Georgia has been built. They have a dominant offensive line. They have a dominant defensive line. And they just continue to load up on Georgia players from that. And when the Falcons haven't been very good and the Eagles just went to the Super Bowl and are going to be the NFC favorites to get there once again this year, you're looking around, Atlanta's not very good right now. They haven't been very good for quite some time. And the Eagles, who are the best team in the conference, just keep picking Georgia players and won't stop picking Georgia players. It leads you to sort of wonder, what do the Eagles know that the Falcons don't? Because any Georgia fan, and a lot of them in the suburban Atlanta area, would tell you, yeah, your team's going to be a lot better when you have Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith on it than, Bijan Robinson, Matthew Bergeron, Drake London, and, some of the other players the Falcons have picked in recent years. 11 of the last 12 drafts, the Falcons have not picked a player from Georgia. And Georgia being a back-to-back national champion, they put a lot of great players in the league. And it's not just, drafting great players from great schools. The Oakland Raiders did that for a while, or the Las Vegas Raiders did that for a while under Mike Mayock and John Gruden. It didn't exactly work out there.
Fair
but
point.
When the Eagles have as much success as they have with Georgia players, it only makes things look worse for the Atlanta Falcons.
And I think, to kind of further that point here a little bit, we heard a lot of chatter about Howie Roseman this week that some NFL GMs are getting frustrated with all the praise that he gets. He's, I think, universally recognized right now maybe the best GM in all the NFL. When it's that guy who is advocating for Georgia so much and all the stuff we've heard about, Eagle Dogs and things like that, basically openly embracing the idea, they've acquired a lot of UGA players. What kind of boost does that provide Georgia's, recruiting outreach and things like that not only is there an NFL team that seems to want every Georgia player they can get, but it's the NFL team that's kind of largely viewed to be the team that's doing this the best right now in the talent acquisition business. How much better does that make that for Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to ignore the value that I think is going to play. Again, 2 straight years, Georgia leads all programs in NFL draft picks. 25 players taken over the last 2 years. That is an NFL draft record. 34 over the last three NFL drafts. No one is producing NFL draft picks at a level like Georgia is right now. And, when it comes to recruits, yes, NIL is becoming a bigger thing, but for most of these top-level guys, the 2 things they care most about are winning and getting to the NFL. Nobody's doing that better than Georgia right now, and I think you're going to see that reflected in this 2024 recruiting class because a lot of times this NFL draft success, I think, tends to be a lagging indicator of, okay, further down the road you get from it, that's when you start to see the real success. And so this is really the first time I think you've seen the NFL draft success reach that level, and I think this 2024 recruiting class, because of the success you saw in 2022, is really going to match up well for Georgia.
All right, let me ask you about this. I talked about this yesterday, and, I like the actual draft. I don't like the pre-draft process. I think you probably like it better than I do, so you may be a better defender of this than I'm going to be able to be. But I think if you're a Georgia fan, you have a right to ask some questions right now. We heard all kinds of, bad things said about Jalen Carter. Character concerns, dropping him in the draft and things like that. But ultimately, he was drafted 9th overall, and the Eagles traded up to get him. There were only a couple of non-quarterbacks taken ahead of him. I honestly don't think whatever character concerns supposedly existed with Jalen Carter actually impacted his draft status all that much. He was still a top 10 pick. Stetson Bennett's another one of these guys. There have been some chatter leading up the NFL draft. He might not be drafted at all. He's hearing all this kind of negative stuff. Ultimately, he's drafted in the 4th round by, a smart quarterback coach like Sean McVay, becoming the only quarterback that McVay has drafted, actually, since he's been in the Rams. Once again, the sort of negative chatter prior to the draft didn't actually seem to be all that real because it did not really seem to impact Bennett's draft status one way or another. Then you've got Florio coming out, Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk, saying the negative stuff from Jalen Carter was coming from, the Georgia staff, which just seems, provably false given the fact that they've got such a close relationship with the Eagles, and the Eagles, the ones that, that sort of stepped up to draft Jalen Carter. You had the red flags around Darnell Washington and his injury after red flags a year ago around Jamari Salyer and Nakobe Dean. It seems like, Connor, there's just a lot of whisper and innuendo about Georgia players. Oftentimes it kind of proves not to be true. In the case of Jamari Salyer, certainly a year ago. If you're a Georgia fan, I think you have to have a right to step up and wonder, how come there's so many anonymous people saying so many bad stuff about my guys here? Because it seems like Georgia has dealt with a lot of that over the course of the last 2 years.
It's something, and you're correct in saying how much I enjoy the NFL draft process. It's something I can't defend, and it's the worst part of it. I think the media is a big reason to blame, and I'm not usually one of the blame the media guys, but when reporters give these anonymous scouts these runways to just say whatever they want without really fact-checking it, and allow them to just publish, quite frankly, whatever. And it's not just Georgia guys. We heard C.J. Stroud was dropping in the draft because of a S2 score. Well, the Texans take him 2nd overall. It is a problem that is larger than just the Georgia industry or the Georgia covering Georgia right now. And the fact that Georgia has so many guys taken every year, you're just going to see this, unfortunately, more and more often now that, because there are so many Georgia players getting taken, a few of them are naturally going to fall. I'm not surprised. And, the draft people that I really read and trust, Daniel Jeremiah of the NFL Network, I think does a better job than anyone. He said, going into it, I did expect Darnell to drop a little bit, but he thought, end of the 2nd round, not all the way to pick number 93. Keely Ringo, his draft stock fell a little bit throughout the process, but nobody saw him falling to pick 105, and the character concerns that were labeled around him, quite frankly, came out of nowhere and were most surprising to me, along with the fact that, the shoulder injury that now all of a sudden pops up for him, despite, playing 2 straight years with no injury concerns whatsoever. As someone who loves the NFL draft process, I find it personally really disgusting because, Jalen Carter could go on to have a great, 10, 15-year career and not have a public misstep or anything along the lines of that. But because of the way he was covered in these past 3-4 months, everyone is going to have this perception of him that he's got character concerns, that he's got character issues. And he's 21 years old, and yes, he got arrested, and yes, he showed up overweight to his pro day, but that's going to define him far longer than, quite frankly, it should. And there's no other way to say it than it just really sucks.
Beyond that, I think that Georgia fans, I don't think we fully processed how important Broderick Jones was, both national championship game at the end of the 2021 season, the way that he played last year. I mean, this is a guy who, even around all the negativity that it seems to exist around so many prospects, he just sort of roller skated his way into like the middle pack of the first round there. Very little negative things ever said about him. Seemed to have a very good year for Georgia. And when you see, the Pittsburgh Steelers racing to the podium to draft him, I think you're left to conclude, gosh, that guy probably leaves a pretty big void here at UGA. I don't think he's probably gotten the full appreciation he should have gotten for just what a dynamic impact he made on that Georgia offensive line a year ago.
Yeah, 19 career starts for Broderick. That is the fewest of any offensive lineman in this draft class, and the Pittsburgh Steelers still traded up to go get him. And I've been adamant. I think he's going to be the best offensive lineman from this class. And in looking at Broderick's career, yes, there's the Alabama game where he comes in and, I think really helps flip that game when they put him at left tackle and they're able to move Jamari Sawyer to right tackle in that game. He got better every single week. And I think one of the most impressive things, when we were first talking about Broderick when he signed as a 5-star recruit, I think everyone assumed he was just going to be a great pass blocker, but there were questions about, is he going to be physical enough in the run game to make an impact there? I thought about the time he left Georgia, he was actually a better run blocker than he was in pass protection. And it speaks to the mentality that he plays with. It speaks to, I think, the level that he got better. And, knowing Broderick from covering him as a recruit to seeing him now, he's gotten, in my opinion, a lot more mature, and you've seen that. And I think as he continues to develop, again, this guy, young kid, 21 years old, the fact that he's already this good as an offensive line prospect and is going to, I think, continue to get better. Andrew Thomas was a great player and is doing so at the NFL level right now. I think Broderick Jones can be even better than Andrew Thomas is, and that speaks a lot to where Broderick is in his development scale and how much better he can still get, in my opinion.
I want to ask you about next year before we wrap up our conversation, but is there anything else maybe like off the radar that maybe we wouldn't have noticed with the NFL draft? You obviously watch it very closely. Is there anything that has not gotten enough chatter and attention in your mind that should be brought to the forefront here?
One thing to keep in mind here, yes, the Eagles do a great job. They take 2 more Georgia players, and then they take Keeler Ringo in the 4th round. Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean didn't exactly play big roles for the Eagles this year, and that's sort of by design. And we've heard Kirby Smart talk about a similar process when it comes with recruiting. Just because you bring in a 5-star freshman doesn't mean they're going to play right away. Sometimes they have to take a year to develop, sort of like Broderick Jones. So if Jalen Carter, if Nolan Smith, who were playing on a loaded defensive line, if Keeler Ringo is playing behind 2 Pro Bowl corners, don't do a whole lot this year, it's kind of by design because the Eagles sort of envision their team doing this, and they want to draft to be ahead of the curve rather than being reactionary and getting guys that they need to play right away.
Looking ahead to next year, obviously Georgia's become a fixture in the first round of the NFL draft. We assume the same thing will be true a year from now. Obviously, the easiest guy to pencil in there is Brock Bowers. I think there's a chance that Bowers is taken very, very high. I just think he's a truly special player. For me, the next name on the list would probably be Amarius Mims, maybe filling a role on the other side of the offensive line, the way that Broderick Jones filled it on the left side here this year. So if I spot you, Amarius and Brock, and you're free to disagree, but if I spot you those two, who is next after those 2 names maybe in terms of potential first-round picks from the 2023 Georgia roster?
So I don't mean to be a wet blanket here. I think it's going to be hard for Georgia to have a lot of first-round picks next year simply because positional value. Even Brock Bowers, who I think is clearly one of the best players in the NFL draft, in college football next year, because of the position that he plays, and you can look in Atlanta and what has happened with Kyle Pitts, I don't know what kind of appetite there is going to be to draft him that high. We saw only one tight end go in the first round this year, and that was Dalton Kincaid. Now, Brock Bowers is obviously better than that, but I do think that positional value is going to have an impact there. It's a deep offensive tackle class next year. There's a guy out of Penn State who's going to be a high draft pick. Joe Alt out of Notre Dame is similarly going to be very highly rated. And we saw Broderick Jones sort of get knocked for his lack of experience. Well, if Amarius Mims starts all 15 games for Georgia like Broderick Jones did, he's going to have even fewer starts. And so while that wasn't a concern for Broderick ultimately, and he did go in the first round, I think that might be something that pushes Amarius down compared to other offensive tackles. Smile Munnin is a guy I think the world of, but he's already got injury concerns. He missed all of last spring with a labrum injury. He had a foot or ankle injury that knocked him out of the spring game this year. And there was one off-ball linebacker taken in this year's first round. And so there just isn't a lot of appetite to take off-ball linebackers, and Clemson's got two very good ones there. I think if I had to name a third one right now, I would say Kamari Lassiter, because I think at cornerback, while yes, having guys that test super well athletically helps, Devon Weatherspoon was the first cornerback taken, and he didn't even test athletically because of a hamstring injury. And I think you've seen with Kamari, and while yes, the Georgia scheme hasn't always been great for getting those guys drafted high in the first round, I was really impressed with what we saw from him last year. I think he's a more natural cornerback than Keeley is, and you're going to see him, I think, continue to get better and improve. So if I had to take one guy that I think could go in the third round, even though he's not going to test, super great like, say, Nolan Smith did this year, I think with what you'll have seen Kamari have put on film, I think there's an expectation that I think you could see him get into the first round next year.
And then last thing for you, the name we haven't mentioned yet is Carson Beck. And for me, Connor, I can't make much of a draft projection on him until I have seen him. The one thing I will say is, once again, when you see, the Rams very happily drafting Stetson Bennett in the fourth round, that's actually pretty high for a Georgia quarterback, not just in the Kirby Smart era, but the Georgia program overall. Georgia doesn't have a lot of first-round pick quarterbacks in its history as an organization. To me, it's a reminder that, hey, Carson Beck actually has really big shoes to fill. And, yeah, Carson Beck sort of looks the part, and I'm optimistic about what his season can be. But, I'm not ready to say yet that Beck's going to step in 1 year and become a better draft prospect necessarily than what Stetson Bennett was, because I think we have a lot of evidence to suggest that Stetson Bennett was just really, really good and oftentimes way better than he was given credit for, I think. Do you have an early opinion yet, albeit sight unseen, about what kind of draft prospect you think that Carson Beck could be next season?
I'm just going to say this, and this was a graphic that popped up over the weekend. If Georgia goes on to win a national championship this year and Carson starts on 15 games, he'll have 15 career starts. The list of quarterbacks taken in the first round that have 16 or fewer career starts, it is Anthony Richardson, who was taken 4th overall by the Colts this year, and while I believe in Richardson and his talent, there are a lot of people out there that are very skeptical of him and what he's ultimately going to be. Cam Newton had 13 career starts, at least at an FBS level if you don't want to count what he did at the junior college level. Mark Sanchez had 16 career starts, and Mitchell Trubisky had 13 career starts. Cam Newton won an MVP and got the Carolina Panthers to the Super Bowl, but the other two guys on that list did not have successful NFL careers, especially when you consider they were taken in the top 10. So there is a lot, and it's going to be something that you hear a lot with Carson. And again, I think you're right to point out there's just no way you can project this, but there are people out there saying, hey, I think Carson Beck could be a first-rounder. The list of NFL quarterbacks that have very few college starts do not have a great track record. So I would be very cautious when it comes to projecting what Carson might look like from an NFL standpoint, simply because he just won't have a lot of starts, and that has been a decent indicator of what we see from a college quarterback. Stetson Bennett, for example, had over 30 career starts, and so I do think that is something that you're going to want to look for, and teams specifically going to want to look for in a guy like Carson Beck, who is not the athlete that either a Cam Newton, Mitchell Trubisky, or Anthony Richardson was.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I don't know what his total number of career starts would have been, but we were joking earlier about, somebody saying that Alabama's looking for Stetson Bennett. I mean, I guess the high-end comp for Carson Beck might be that he could be Georgia's version of Mac Jones, the guy that waited, was patient, got a chance, and albeit in a pandemic year when no one was playing defense, really kind of exploded with some big numbers there in 2020. I guess if you're Carson Beck, that's sort of what you're hoping for, right, is that, hey, I can do a lot statistically in what might be my one big year here to kind of overcome the fact that I haven't played a lot prior to that.
Right, and Mac Jones had 19 career starts because he started 4 games the season before 2020 when Tua went down. And I mean, as a New England Patriots fan, I'll be honest, Mac Jones has not exactly shown a ton in terms of what he's potentially going to be at the next level. And he had a great, I would say, senior season there at Alabama in 2021. While yes, it was against when no one was playing defense, he was still incredible that year. And so, if that's the bar that Carson needs to have to go in the first round, I still think that's a really high bar for a guy to clear who we just, quite frankly, haven't even seen. Whereas, at least with Mac Jones, you saw him go and play well, albeit throwing 2 pick sixes on the road against Auburn. You saw him beat a Michigan team in Florida Bowl that they were in that year because they lost multiple games. So it's a really high bar for Carson to clear. And again, we've got to see Carson go, how he looks on the road at Auburn before we can even, have any sort of idea about what he might look like in an NFL draft.
No, that would be quite a showdown there for him to show what he's all about, showcase, I should say. Connor, really good stuff. We just appreciate your insight into everything that happened over the course of the draft season, and obviously now the attention starts to turn fully to what this 2023 campaign can be all about. So I'll look forward to talking to you about that here coming up in the weeks ahead. Thanks so much for your time.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about it. As Connor said, okay, well, some of the positions that Georgia may be best at next season are not always positions in which the NFL values from a first-round standpoint. That may be the case. And yet, the thing I'm a big believer on with Brock Bowers is and I think that he's done this. I think one final year at Georgia, I believe it'll be his final year, one final year at Georgia can kind of take this sort of the next step of, I think it's appropriate to view Bowers as just sort of a positionless player. We say that sometimes with the guys on defense. In basketball, it's kind of become kind of a positionless sport. The best NBA players don't really kind of seem to be defined by a position as much anymore. I think that's kind of the way I believe that Brock Bowers ought to be viewed too. Last year we made a big thing about, hey, don't compare him to other tight ends, compare him to other wide receivers. And from that standpoint, Bowers essentially is a wide receiver. And obviously we see plenty of those guys drafted, in the first round each and every year. If you gave me the chance to trade Bowers for really any wide receiver in college football, I haven't seen one yet I'd trade him for. I think he is that good. And I do believe that this year he could play in such a way that, could kind of remove all doubt about that and kind of elevate him in a conversation of, you think he's a tight end, but he can actually be whatever you want him to be. He is just an offensive weapon. And so I hope, that's what this season becomes for Brock Bowers, a chance to be thought of that way. And then, of course, if you say, well, you don't see a lot of inside linebackers drafted in the first round and you don't have a lot of this, a lot of that, you imagine how deep the NFL draft could be for Georgia 2 drafts from now then, when some of those elite recruits have been coming into the program become draft eligible. A lot to think about, a lot of fun stuff to talk about, and obviously we'll get there over the course of time. But for now, though, we've got to go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I'll tell you, I still look back on and have so much fun reflecting on just how great this DawgNation cruise was. And I've heard from so many of the folks that have been on the cruise. Yeah, there you see a wonderful picture of us. We showed this yesterday as part of our Golden Shoe. I'm going to show you some more pictures from the cruise at some point in time. Just such a great group of folks, and really everybody I talked to seemed to be having a great time with that cruise, which made me so happy because obviously here at DawgNation, we'd like to please folks. We'd like to make sure they're having a good time. And it certainly seemed like everybody was having a great time with that DawgNation cruise. So for those of you who were there, I truly, sincerely, deeply say thank you for it. And for those of you that wish you could be there, I'll tell you the next best thing is to plan your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. The summertime is a great time to do that. Kids are out of school. The ships are so much fun. There's so much energy and enthusiasm running the ship on that, whether it be one of those 7-night stays, one of the Oasis class ships. I was on Wonder of the Seas in February. I highly recommend that for all the fun things that it provides, the different neighborhoods, the cool stuff that's going on. For some of you, a 7-day cruise is a little bit of a, you don't have enough time to do that right now. For you, a shorter itinerary is a little bit better. You think about a 3-night or a 4-night stay, and, I've got a 3-night cruise coming up in June. I'm going to take my mom on a cruise. Really excited about that. Whichever itinerary fits you best, there is a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation for you. And, of course, we're all getting excited, as you see on the screen there, about January 2024, the debut of Icon of the Seas. We're talking to some folks on the ship this past week about some of the cool things that Icon's going to have going on. Different concepts, different bars and restaurants, specialty restaurants, some great new entertainment options. It's going to be a wonderful experience. So check out Jessica Slater, great travel agent. She can help you out with more on this. 770-718-9147. 770-718-9147 for more details on that. All right, let's talk SEC here for a moment. We got some Dylan Raiola stuff coming up here in a moment. But prior to that, let's get some SEC news. So we talked about Tyler Buchner, the Alabama transfer quarterback, a little earlier, and the optimistic appraisal maybe that he could be Alabama's version of Stetson Bennett, someone who maybe comes in, not all that heralded. Buchner did play a little bit for Notre Dame a year ago, played in the bowl game, threw almost as many interceptions as touchdowns, so he certainly does not come into Tuscaloosa with a huge degree of fanfare necessarily. But that does not stop ESPN from really lavishing him with a good bit of praise in a recent write-up they had. They do these kind of like roundtable type discussions where they say, hey, who's the big transfer, who's the big whatever, and there was some chatter about Tyler Buchner in this piece at ESPN.com. I want to read this to you. And if you wonder why does Nick Saban make himself so accessible to ESPN, do all these interviews, things like that, it's because occasionally you might get a little coverage that sounds a little something like this. So let me read to you from ESPN.com. The Crimson Tide have a key role to fill in their roster with the departure of quarterback Bryce Young. Who takes his place remains a question. They have options on campus, including Jalen Milroe. And then, but he says, but none of these guys are going to be plug-and-play answers. To address this need, they added Tyler Buchner, Notre Dame's top signee in 2021. So the hype is sort of building here for Buchner from ESPN.com. While an injury sidelined him most of last season, he comes with valuable experience as a starter, and ended his time with the Fighting Irish on a high note with an MVP performance in the bowl game win over South Carolina. He also reunites with his former offensive coordinator Tommy Rees, who is now at Alabama as well. This addition could give Alabama a talented and experienced hand at the wheel of the offense of a national title contender. That is about as favorable an assessment as you can provide of what Buchner could be if he does emerge as the Alabama starting quarterback. And that is a pretty favorable appraisal right there. I would dare suggest maybe more favorable than the situation actually warrants, because what this little write-up about Buchner does not reveal to you is the reason why he's transferring from Notre Dame is because he's not going to be the starting quarterback at Notre Dame. Sam Hartman's going to be the starting quarterback at Notre Dame. So therefore, Buchner had to go somewhere for a chance to win. So all of a sudden, much the same way that Tressman Marshall leaves Georgia because he got a better chance to play at Alabama, all of a sudden you've got a Buchner leaving Notre Dame because he's got a better chance to play with the Crimson Tide there as well. That ought to be alarming. And, at the end of this little write-up, they call Alabama a national title contender with Buchner at the helm. Are they still that? Maybe so. I don't know that it's a given necessarily. I really don't. And, this kind of reminds me of, like, the situation with Jermaine Burton a year ago. I don't mean to – you're not going to say a bad word about Jermaine, but Alabama thought because it was Alabama they could magically make Jermaine Burton into a great wide receiver just because he was wearing that crimson uniform. And it turned out that's not exactly the case, that Burton had proven himself to be good at Georgia, but making the transition to being great at Alabama, which is what they needed him to be, that just wasn't in the offering last season for Burton. And be careful assuming the same thing about Buchner of, we're going to take him off this Notre Dame roster, we're going to put him on this Alabama roster, and magically he's going to become the what do they call him? The experienced hand at the wheel of a national championship contender. Maybe so. Or maybe he, along with Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson, is the reason why Alabama actually can't compete for the national title here this year. I just think that's a very favorable description by ESPN of the Alabama quarterback situation. Obviously, Alabama fans hope that's true, but as the saying goes, hope in one hand and whatever else. But anyway, so that's the situation there on that. By the way, speaking of Alabama, and a completely different story here for a moment, I thought this was interesting. So a guy named David Purdom reported this first. Some other the gambling websites sort of picked up on this in addition to that. So sports books in Ohio, sports wagering is legal now, I think 37 states. So you've got sports books all across the country now. And sports books in Ohio suspended betting on all Alabama baseball games recently because of what they thought was a little bit of an odd betting pattern in a game from this weekend involving Alabama and LSU. LSU was a huge favorite in the game. And the game ended up being 8-6. LSU was up big. Alabama came back, close to the end. I don't really quite know, what the actual accusation might be here, but what the sports books said they recognized was an odd betting pattern, which what it probably means is that way more bets came in on a college baseball game than should normally come in. This is the thing that you've heard about, like point shaving scandals in college basketball over the years, things like that. There's been a lot of like books and stuff written about this. In most cases, the famous point shaving scandals that have taken place in college basketball, in many cases, I should say, the sports books in Nevada, which was back then about the only place you could bet on this kind of stuff, were pretty well aware that something was up weird with these games because a typical regular season college basketball game does not produce a very big, what they call handle, which is the amount of money wagered on one of these games. They just don't produce very big handles. And when you have a huge, exorbitant sum of money bet on some of these games, you sort of have an idea of, something must be up. So apparently some folks in Ohio, some of the sports books there, thought something must be up with one of these Alabama college baseball games. And, who's to say what the specific accusation is, what the specific concern is. But they stopped taking bets on these. And now some other states have kind of followed suit there on that. So this is kind of worth paying attention to. Obviously, sports wagering is legal in a lot of places, and a lot of these sports books start to expand their offerings to the kinds of games they take bets on. But when it's one of these sort of smaller sports with a smaller audience in general, if anybody tries to get frisky with anything involving that, it's just going to be easier to spot it because the big bet is probably presence of something might be weird about it. So, we may see stories like this more in the future or, whatever. But kind of an interesting developing situation potentially involving an SEC baseball situation there. No specific accusation as of yet, but sports books have stopped taking bets on Alabama baseball here for right now, as reported by one of the ESPN.com guys. And then finally, there's this. I think this is a fairly sizable story. Now, why are we doing this? I'm trying to do something good. So we're going to talk about Garrett Nussmeier for a second. And the picture we see is Jalen Carter holding up Jaden Daniels, which is kind of a funny transition. I don't know when that's funny to me. We're talking about the LSU quarterback situation. The first thing you see is Daniels being hoisted in the air like a trophy. That cracks me up. That's very funny. But the point is the transfer portal has closed, and one of the names that did not enter the transfer portal is Garrett Nussmeier. It's been reported coming out of LSU that Nussmeier's plan is to stay with that program here for the 2023 season. And the guy, if you're watching a video, you see on your screen, Jaden Daniels, he got hurt during the SEC championship game, had to give way to Garrett Nussmeier, and Nussmeier came in and played pretty well. I've told you a lot that I think that Nussmeier can still be a weapon for LSU. Maybe Daniels is the better of the two quarterbacks. Maybe he's the guy that, if he's healthy, is destined to start. But if there was ever a situation in which you could conceivably have a role for two quarterbacks, Daniels and Nussmeier being such different players, maybe that's an example of one of those situations that could, kind of work out. And, keep in mind, Walker Howard left LSU to go to Ole Miss. Part of the reason I believe he left is because I think he realized just how good Garrett Nussmeier really was. Sometimes you sort of see that happening there. So Nussmeier staying with LSU, I think, is a pretty big deal. We just talked a good bit today about the Alabama quarterback situation. I think it's fairly easy to surmise that LSU has two quarterbacks right now, better than anything Alabama has. And so, from that standpoint, holding on to both these quarterbacks for the upcoming season, I think, is a pretty big deal. So whether it be Nussmeier coming in because of an injury or Brian Kelly getting creative and finding a way to use both these quarterbacks, Nussmeier remaining with LSU, I think, is a pretty big deal. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, normally this is the part of the show in which we catch up with former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. We always love his conversations. We'll look forward to hopefully getting a chance to do that very soon. Jake not available today, but in keeping with the chatter around quarterbacks, I did want to give you this quick note. So, obviously, the other day, we were kind of on commitment watch for five-star quarterback Dylan Raiola. That rumor sort of bubbled up out of nowhere, and everybody was kind of manning their battle stations for what might come next on that, and then sort of nothing came. Certainly, no one has kind of been of the belief that the relationship between Raiola and Georgia has changed very much here. It's still sort of thought that Georgia's in the driver's seat for that recruitment, and obviously Georgia doing everything it can in the final stretch to make sure that remains true. So with that in mind, the school that Raiola attends out in Arizona, Pinnacle, put out on Twitter here this week that Georgia offensive coordinator Mike Bobo, the Pinnacle football program, saying thank you to Coach Mike Bobo and Georgia football for coming out to practice today and check out the Pioneers. So Bobo flying out to Arizona, getting a chance to see Raiola in person. One of the things we've been led to believe here is that Mike Bobo is actually a very positive development in Raiola's recruitment, that seemingly the relationship that Raiola had with Georgia was enhanced and increased because of the presence of Mike Bobo here at offensive coordinator. So that's one of the weapons that Georgia may have for itself going forward, is an offensive coordinator in Bobo right now who can take the lead on a recruitment like this and have a real chance to win with a guy like Raiola. Comfort there. Obviously, we know that Raiola knows Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford knows Mike Bobo. There's just a little bit of kind of a comfort all around there. And Bobo, who when he was here in his previous iteration as Georgia offensive coordinator, viewed to be one of the best recruiters in the entire program, kind of stepping back into that role as offensive coordinator right now and going out and kind of visiting face-to-face with Dylan Raiola and maybe having a chance to put the finishing touches on a recruitment that might result in a Raiola commitment sooner rather than later. Don't forget, Raiola's got that official visit coming to Georgia at the beginning of June. There had been some thought that he might commit prior to that official visit, so we'll find out this month if that is indeed in the offering. But Bobo out in Arizona visiting Dylan Raiola, pretty big development in kind of next steps here in the recruitment of the nation's number one player and a five-star quarterback, Dylan Raiola. Very, very interesting things to come on that note. So we'll keep our eyes on what happens next in all of this. And as we wrap up here today, getting back to Golden Shoes after not having some last week because of our pre-recorded shows, and we talked about the Georgia fans' newfound love for the Philadelphia Eagles, maybe kind of leaving the Falcons at the altar to go do that. Our buddy Mad Dog was on that topic. Nice little illustration here. He says, DawgNation Daily, the Dogs are flying with the Eagles. You see Georgia Bulldog there say, take care of my boys, and the Eagle comes back to say, you got it, dog. So there you go. A lot of Dog fans loving all those Philadelphia Eagles. up there, former Georgia players up there with Philadelphia, and who knows, maybe we'll do a DawgNation invasion to the city of brotherly love at some point in time there as well. I think the schedule comes out in a few weeks, so we will see if there's any game that kind of makes some sense for us there on that. So good job, Mad Dog. We'll give you a golden shoe there on that. By the way, speaking of teams we don't like very much, but those lousy, stinking Gators. 179 days from right now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, beating Florida again. That's our Gator Hater Countdown. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. All right, let's trust you now to deliver some great commentary to us as a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. And speaking of cool, kind of cooler temps today. I think our good friend Ella Dorsey said that it was like the second coldest May 2nd ever or something like that. There's like some sort of history-making, temperature thing today. I'm not very good, astute observer of the weather, but apparently we're a little cooler today than we have been. So on Facebook here for a moment. Alan Verbachik says that Nick Saban's lost the ability to get coaches that can coach up and develop players, which has been their problem. Coaches used to knock down Saban's door. Not anymore, though. Saban's still recruiting at a high level, but these elite recruits, he says, are not coming there. And I think there's something to be said for that, that the most significant thing to happen for Alabama this offseason was, as Alan's pointing out, was the fact when we had a chance to hire both new coordinators, there wasn't this, like, heroic figure stepping in to save the day the way that Lane Kiffin may have done in 2014, or maybe Steve Sarkisian did when he took the play calling helm, a couple of years after that. That guy just wasn't out there. Like Tommy Rees was not a big time hire. They kind of wanted to make the Jeremy Pruitt hire, but it seemed on defense. And in absence of being able to do that, like you go out and just get Kevin Steele, who's, I think he's a fine defensive coordinator, but he's not necessarily moving the needle for most Alabama fans. And so what you see playing out the transfer quarterback right now, I think, is very similar to what you saw play out earlier this year, that Alabama fans have been of the belief now for a couple of years that there's just some sort of mystery candidate behind some sort of door number 3 type thing, and it just never quite happens. Last year that the arrival of all these transfer portal players were supposed to change the program, right? Burton and Jahmyr Gibbs. And Gibbs would end up becoming a first-round pick, but it didn't really do much for Alabama on the field. Same thing this year. Oh, we're going to get some quarterback like Drake May is going to come here. Well, he didn't. Drake May didn't leave North Carolina. Oh, some great coordinator is going to come in here. He's going to do better than Bill O'Brien did, or better than Pete Golding did. And what you have are quarterbacks who are, they may be better, but no real reason to believe they're going to be demonstrably better. That Alabama is forced to reckon with it right now. They're going to have to be good enough with what they have. That there is not some secret stash somewhere of coaching or player talent they're going to tap into to rehabilitate the program. That they're going to have to be good with what they have. Now, listen, this is still Alabama. They may be good with what they have, but right now that's all they have. Or in Chile, Barry Watkins talking about quarterbacks right now. Barry's saying that if we get Dillon, Gunner will transfer because next year will be Brock Vandagriff. Yeah, see, once again, some of y'all, and Barry's obviously a great commenter, but some of y'all are very, very comfortable making appraisals of things that we haven't seen with our own eyes yet, and I'm just not that comfortable. I'm not. If Dylan Raiola comes here, he will be in a competition with Vandagriff and with Gunner Stockton. And I'm here to tell you that I think any of those guys could potentially emerge as the winner. We've seen big-time surprises with quarterback situations here at Georgia before. So maybe Raiola, as an incoming freshman, just sort of steps in and wins it because he's that good. But what I saw from Gunner Stockton on G-Day would suggest to me that Stockton can be a factor in a quarterback competition. And, I would say that Brock Vandagriff can be too. But the one thing that's not going to necessarily be the case is, this year, obviously, experience seems to have won out for Carson Beck. But Vandagriff being the more experienced guy next year, if it really is a Vandagriff, Raiola, Stockton comparison, I don't know that it's necessarily quite the same thing. And so I'm not going to speculate on who's definitely going to start, who's definitely going to transfer. It's going to be a competition, much like this year has kind of been. The best man's going to kind of win, and everyone's going to have to make the decisions that make sense for them. Obviously, over the course of a good number of years, you're going to have quarterback transfer at some point in time because that's just what quarterbacks do in this day and age. But I'm going to be really, really slow to make any kind of assured statement about something we haven't seen with our own eyes yet. Joseph Kennedy says, I really hope Raiola commits soon. We need something exciting to happen. Yeah, it kind of sets up for the potential of a fun summer if you could get that news sooner rather than later. That's true. Yeah, see, Wayne Kirkland doing the same thing. He's Brock's going to be quarterback net one next season. If Dillon comes, then Gunner's going to transfer. I'm just telling you right now, things are just not that easy to predict. They're just not. Things are not that easy to predict. They are not that easy to predict. But you may turn out to be right. I'm just saying some of y'all are more comfortable being assured of something that hasn't happened yet than I am. Let me go to YouTube for a minute here. On YouTube, Duran Willis, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Good to see you, Duran. I'm glad you're in here today. That's awesome. Very, very, very good to see. And once again, remind me, is it Schuler or is it Schuyler? Remind me of that, because I've messed this up before, but he brings up a good point that, Beck may not leave next year. So selfishly, I'm sort of ready for the pandemic year to be over, because I feel like it makes it very hard to kind of know who has, what kind of time. But technically, Beck does have more eligibility if he were to choose to use it. So that's also one of those things that, you can't be too sure of either. Ridgefly says, we missed you. Hope Royal Caribbean was fun. Ridgefly, it was really fun. Hopefully next year you can be on board with us, because we did have a great, great time, for sure. Great time. And A.D. Mitchell, I know he had the nice catch in the spring game, and A.D. Mitchell could go to Texas and have a really good performance, for sure. Paul Moon says, if Raiola does come to UGA and does beat out the other guys, and then they leave, so be it. I want to find the dude. Yeah, I mean, ultimately that's what it kind of comes down to is, hey, a competition that produces the best winner. And if the young guy, like Raiola were to step in, if he even were to come to Georgia, which obviously we're kind of on the assumption that he will right now, if he were to step in and win it, then like you said, you sort of have to let the best man win. It's going to be okay with all of that, for sure. Unearthing Southern Relic says, the Falcons are a professional version of Georgia Tech. I'm an Eagles fan now, baby. I like that. Jonathan Aaron says, any update on Dominic Blaylock? No, I don't have that to give you right now. Obviously the portal window was open for new names to enter. Blaylock wasn't under any kind of deadline to make any kind of announcement during all of that. But we are coming up on that time in which, to be enrolled and attending a new school by this summer, it seems like you'd have to announce something pretty soon. So I guess the question now becomes, and, I'm always hesitant to speculate out loud too much, but I don't mind telling you that behind the scenes, I've been speculating plenty about whether or not that Blaylock was going to play football at all for this upcoming year. And the longer this goes, I think kind of brings that into question of, if he's going to be somewhere this summer, then the time to announce that here is pretty soon. So the longer we go without hearing something, the more I guess it becomes a possibility that maybe he's just not playing anywhere for this upcoming fall. Maybe injuries, whatever, situation kind of going on there. That is certainly not something I'm reporting because I don't have anything to report. But the longer this goes without an announcement coming, the more you have to, I think, view that as a possibility. William Perry says the best part of the cruise was blank, because William was on with us. For me, it's always Perfect Day Coco Cay. I just love that. It's the thing that sets, I think, Royal Caribbean apart from almost any kind of vacation you take. The private island, being there, a lot of fun, Georgia fans hanging out, having a good time. For me, that's always the very best thing. And then, beyond that, I think the draft party is always really fun too, because you have this beautiful, scene for that. The sun's kind of setting. Draft on the big screen. A lot of folks, and I've never been to a draft party like this before. And so I would say for me, there was those two things. Perfect Day Coco Cay is always going to be number one on my list. And then draft party is probably number two. William, that's a good question. Thanks for asking. Nature Gator says, hope these folks slip into the Eagles don't become bandwagon fans and flip back to the Falcons when they start winning. Well, I guess the Falcons have to start winning first before us to worry about that. Kirby's Bell going to take a family 7-day Royal Caribbean cruise vacation over Christmas. Kirby, that's awesome. Kirby's Bell, hope you guys have a great time on that. That's awesome. Lesko says all it takes is for UGA to lose one game, and the haters will say we've fallen back to our former mediocrity. it'll be 40 years before y'all win another one. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's kind of the nature of all of this is the same way that a lot of Georgia fans are very quick to sort of jump up and celebrate Alabama's demise right now before it's actually happened. If Georgia were to lose a game next year, you'll have some of the same kind of stuff. That's just what people do. They jump the gun. That's the way all this kind of stuff goes. Thomas Tyson excited about Bijan Robinson with the Atlanta Falcons, so there you go there on that. Chase White says, if we three-peat, I'm going on the next Dog Nation cruise. Well, I hope both those things happen for sure. Nature Gator says that includes me as well. He's talking about me. He says, I'm always a Falcon fan for me. Yeah, so I'm not – Falcons will still be my favorite NFL team. They are. But I have never felt this strongly about the Falcons as I do the Braves. I just never have. And – by the way, in my lifetime, the Falcons have played in 2 Super Bowls, and, that level of winning didn't change that. So I don't know what you do with that, but I've always had 2 teams. I've had Georgia and I've had the Braves. And, when I was a kid, the Braves were terrible. So I didn't just jump on the Braves because they were winning. They didn't start winning until after I'd been a fan for a long time. I grew up in the 80s, as a child anyway. So for whatever reason, even back during the 80s, the Braves were my team and Georgia was my team. And not like when I was growing up, Georgia was winning all that much necessarily either, at least in terms of championships, things like that. So, my roots for those 2 teams run deep. And as you get older, you don't have, like some of y'all in your 20s, all y'all do is watch sports. You get 7 sports things going at one time. As you get a little older, you don't really have time for everything you want to do anymore. And so, right now I've got room for 2 teams. I got room for the Braves. I watch them every night. You got room for Georgia football. Obviously, I talk about them every day. So that's not to say I don't root for the Falcons, but, my roots have just never quite run as deep for the Atlanta Falcons. Even in the moments in which they've been good, it's just never quite been the same thing. So I don't mind telling you, I am not going to call the Philadelphia Eagles my favorite NFL team because all these Georgia players play on them. Will I look forward to watching the Eagles in every game I can next year? Yes. So from that standpoint, I love the fact that the Eagles have embraced Georgia as much as they have. My favorite team will still be the Falcons. I'm not going to change my mind on that. But I would, as I said off the top of the show, I'd like to see Atlanta do more, the Falcons organization do more, try to win over some of these Georgia fans. I think they could do it if they just tried. I don't think they try hard enough. I really don't. And, if you don't want to draft Jalen Carter, that's fine, I guess. But, over the course of years, you have a history of not exactly making the best picks. Eagles right now, as Connor astutely pointed out earlier, they have a much better history of making better draft picks than you do. You better hope this is not another example of you being wrong, them being right, because that's the kind of thing that Georgia fans have a long memory about. They just do. And so if you're not going to draft the Georgia players, which Georgia fans want you to do, you better find out some other way to reach out to them. Otherwise, they'll be content to watch college football on Saturday and go to the lake on Sunday. There's no rule that says you have to have a favorite NFL team. Let's see what else. Thomas Tyson says the Thrashers coming back will be better than the Falcons. For those of you who don't know, there's been some chatter about building a hockey rink in an arena kind of out, northern Atlanta suburbs a little bit, with the possibility that the NHL team could be coming back. And if it does come back, I hope it is the Thrashers. I hope they call it the Thrashers. Let's see what else. Paul Moon talking about going to a United game. So I actually did get to go to a United game a couple of years ago, or a match, whatever we call it. I thought it was pretty fun. I'm not that big of a soccer fan. My son likes soccer. Kids play the FIFA game, so they all kind of get into soccer a little bit, it seems like. So my son likes soccer a little bit, so we went to the match, or the game, whatever you call it. It was fun. It was fun. I am not a huge soccer guy, though. Kirby's Belt says Braves where it's at in Atlanta. Yeah, a lot of us have been Braves fans for as long as we remember anything. James F. talking about the Braves being the winningest team in sports back in the 90s. Yeah, they won, what, was it 15 straight, 17 straight? From 91 all the way to 2005, right? However many years that is. Yeah, for sure. Jonathan Aaron says, what are the odds that Blaylock plays with Prime or Ole Miss? Obviously, those are 2 portal destinations. I just don't know. I think the odds are starting to increase that maybe Blaylock doesn't play anywhere next year, if I had to guess. But for now, that's just a guess. Let me go to DawgNation.com again for a minute. See what folks are saying over there. Bill Russell's after another couple of drafts, most NFL teams will have at least 3 to 4 dogs. Bill's probably about right on that. By the way, for our Dog Nation cruise, that's another thing that's really fun. We had this great trivia contest. Bill was part of our trivia contest winning team there on that. South Georgia's Dog says, Braves were so terrible when I was a kid. Instead of introducing the players before the game, they would just introduce the fans. That's actually really funny. Morris Rich, the Orlando Dog, says it just seems like the Falcons don't want to spend the money to win. They are good with being just average, if that. Yeah, I don't know about that necessarily. I just think that, look, what the Falcons don't want to seem to acknowledge is that the relevance they have, you know, in our town compared to the sports teams is just really lacking. You know, Atlanta made a defensive coordinator hire this offseason. What got more attention? Atlanta making a defensive coordinator hire or Georgia making an offensive coordinator hire? We pretty much knew who the Georgia OC was going to be, but it still generated a lot more conversation. I don't just mean on this show because all we do is talk about Georgia football. I'm talking about on all shows, all sort of social media, internet conversations. You know, Falcons defensive coordinator search was essentially a non-existent sports topic. You know, even the Hawks with Trae Young, it seems like they sort of developed more chatter locally than what the Falcons do. That's something that if I was a Falcons PR type person, I'd be a little concerned about. John Carter says Andrew Thomas just got his option picked up by the Giants. That's great to hear. I think that Andrew's actually turned out to be a pretty good player there. You know, I think there were some concerns maybe after his rookie season a little bit, but it seems like that he's really kind of turned into a pretty good player there. Cam Hasty reminding us the Rams now also have 4 dogs. That's good to know. Jacob Yarbrough on the subject of Royal Caribbean. So, like, one of the things that I think that sets the Royal Caribbean cruise experience apart, and obviously I'm a little bit biased. I won't pretend not to be. But one of the things that I think that makes me biased here, and you can talk to people and kind of ask them, is I think the entertainment options on board a Royal Caribbean cruise ship are really the things that I think sort of push it over the top. You know, the fact that on the ship we were on the other night, you know, there's an ice skating show that takes place. Like, this is like a, you know, true, you know, in a venue made specifically for the ice skating show. You've got these like world-class performers doing all the tricks and the triple axels and things like that. My kids loved that. On the ship we were on this past week, there's also the Broadway performance of Grease, which is kind of a cool thing. They, you know, when I was on the ship back in February, I counted one night we were walking around, there was live music playing in like 8 different places at one time. You could literally do your own pub crawl and go from like live music venue one right after the other, after the other, after the other. So one of the reasons why I'm, you know, so I guess enthusiastic about recommending Royal Caribbean is because of that. I just feel like the entertainment options, I believe, sort of set it apart from anything else that exists at sea. And, you know, obviously, you want to do your own research on that, things like that. But when you look into that, that's one of the things I think you'll kind of come back to is that what they do from an entertainment standpoint, if you're on one of the Oasis class ships, the Aqua Theater on the back of the ship where you have the high divers and things like that, there's just so many creative shows that Royal Caribbean brings to the forefront. That's one of the reasons why I like, you know, their service so much. Let me go back to Facebook here, and we'll kind of take one more trip around the comment section here. Let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy says he thinks the Falcons go 8-9 this year. I know they're hoping for more than that. I mean, especially considering the fact that on paper they play in the worst division in the league. Brandon Griffin says without Big O, without a pass-catching back like McIntosh, our wide receiver is going to get a lot of work this year, especially with the pocket passer like Beck. Could be the case. Obviously, we expect to see Georgia, you know, using guys like Dominic Lovett effectively. I do still think, though, that Georgia wants to throw the ball out of the backfield. I do. We might not quite yet know who the back that's going to be catching a lot of those passes going to be yet, but I do believe that Georgia wants to throw it out of the backfield. I do. Matt Rugavina excited about the future of Broderick Robinson. I would say that I am there as well. Jerry Popham not happy with the Falcons taking a running back at 8 overall. Todd Greer asking about using multiple quarterbacks for Georgia. I mean, I think that if we assume that Brock Vandagriff is the backup, I think he's going to play about as much as a typical backup does. I don't believe that Georgia will have any plans to, have a 2-quarterback system of any kind. Vandagriff does have great legs. That came out weird. He does use his legs well, is what I mean to say. Sorry, that's not quite what I meant. That Vandagriff does, use his legs well. He has, he has the ability to move around. He's got the capability of being able to do that. But that's the kind of thing that I believe that Georgia would utilize in the event that Carson Beck is injured or something like that. I mean, it's fairly obvious to me that Beck is the starting quarterback for Georgia. I think being the backup at a place like Georgia can be a good thing because Georgia's up big. You have a chance to play. But I don't foresee, if we assume that Vandagriff is the backup, I don't foresee him being used any more than a typical backup quarterback is used. Much the same way a year ago, Carson Beck played like a typical backup quarterback would play. My guess is that Vandagriff will be in a similar role this year. Jared Bailey. Yeah, there you go. That's funny. All right. Joseph Kennedy about Mattress Mac, all that money he spent betting on TCU. I didn't see where TCU had like 8 guys drafted. Amazing that Georgia beat them 65-7. Cam Hasty. Yeah, Cam, I try to choose my words pretty carefully. I try to choose my words pretty carefully. Richard D says, I'm currently intrigued by who will be our next star left tackle. Well, I mean, it sounds like the battle between Blasky and Green was a pretty good one. So if Ernest Green's on his way to winning that, then that's a pretty good answer right there. And we talked to Connor a little earlier about Amarius Mims. Mims playing on the right side, probably just because that's where he's been, I guess. But, I mean, that's another guy who I think has a chance to be really, really very good. So I think an underrated aspect of Georgia's last 2 national championship teams has been how good the offensive line has been and how prominent a role in the wins the offensive line played. And I think for this upcoming year, it's kind of true once again. We've talked about the lack of tackle depth that seems to exist with most programs, even like really good teams just hoping they have tackles that can start, whereas Georgia's kind of thinking more about its 3rd and 4th offensive tackle right now. There's a great deal of depth here right now that most teams don't seem to have, and that, to me, explains the winning that Georgia's been doing almost as much as anything, including that great defense. All right, let me get some final comments here. I'm back on YouTube here for a moment. Brandon Griffin says Vandagriff in short yardage situations behind our line would be pretty much unstoppable. It would certainly have a chance to be very successful. Foster Moss says, do you think the Eagles are drafting these dogs as a setup so that Schumann won't refuse the next offer? That's an interesting way of saying that because obviously we had plenty of reporting out there that they had tried to make him their defensive coordinator. I think the cool thing about Glenn Schumann is that in a day and age in which it seems like a lot of coaches are kind of souring on the idea of college football, Georgia has a lot of coaches who want, as the kids like to say, they want that smoke, right? College football is getting harder. Transfer portal, NIL makes it more difficult. And yet guys like Schumann at Georgia want to be in college football. They sort of see their path to professional success navigating what makes college football difficult right now because they know there'll be great riches as a reward when they navigate these difficult waters that currently exist in college football. And that's a great thing for Georgia. That Georgia has coaches like Schumann that embrace the hard part about college football, that he could go to the NFL and be a defensive coordinator for Philadelphia. But when you've got the ability to do well in college football, you potentially have the ability to make yourself even more money because of how quickly you can become a head coach and things like that. And so having a guy like Schumann who's so pro college football, I think for Georgia is a very good thing. Let's see what else. Let's see what else. Howard Eubank says, last year for the SEC East and the SEC West, the Dogs win it for posterity. Yeah, I mean, I do think there's something to be said for that. Because what has Georgia won? I mean, I do think, winning that final SEC East, it's kind of a big deal to me. I don't even really know why it's a big deal, but I would like for Georgia to be the last winner in the SEC East. I would like for that to be true. I guess I always want them to win the division, but, we started Own the East as an idea, many, many years ago, and since we started that, Georgia's fairly well owned the East. This is our last year to be able to own the East. So I hope they do. Let us see what else. Bubba and Christy are talking about something. I'm not even sure I want to know what that is. Let's see what else. James F. says the Falcons need to change the mascot to the Atlanta Bulldogs and be the first team to exclusively draft players from the University of Georgia. But let's say they did do that. Like, they'd have, George Pickens at wide receiver. They'd have, I'm not quite so sure that Desmond Ridder's a better quarterback than Stetson Bennett is. If all you did was draft Georgia players, you might not be in such a bad spot right now. B. Pathel says South Carolina has an SEC East championship banner. Yeah, so South Carolina won it in 2010. The only schools to never win a division, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. That's right? There are 4 teams that have never won a division. Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. Everybody else has won a division. And frankly, I think that South Carolina, Mississippi State. So South Carolina and Mississippi State are the only teams that have won a division that only won once. Like Arkansas won the SEC West a few times. They won it a couple of times. So they probably actually won it more than you think. South Carolina and Mississippi State each won it once. 4 teams haven't won it at all. So that's, something else that's going on for this final year there as well. Anything else? Final comments. Yeah, so Matt Rugavina said, I was, because at one point in time I was kind of hoping that maybe Georgia would have won the most SEC East, but obviously they don't have a chance to be able to do that. Ancient history for Florida, obviously. They won a good number of divisions way back, before high-definition televisions and, really before the modern age. So Georgia can't claim the most SEC East, but it'd still be nice to win another one. Nick Roundtree says 4 words, Ronald Acuna, upper deck. Nick, we're actually talking about that a little earlier today. If y'all have not seen that third deck home run that Acuna hit yesterday, it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable, like way up there. There's like one guy who was like sitting like right where the ball hit. It's amazing. And there's no way he could have thought he was going to be getting a home run ball that day. This ball was put into orbit. Chase Barbie giving you a Fly Dogs Fly in honor of the Fly Eagles Fly song. I do like the fact that a lot of these like northern NFL teams have fight songs. I sort of feel like that's kind of a cool thing, like the Fly Eagles Fly, EAGLES Eagles. I kind of like those like old school northern NFL teams that have their own fight songs. All right, we got to get ready to go. Good stuff here, everybody, today. Thanks for being here as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Y'all check R.S. Andrews out online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Also, make sure you check out the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, ajc.com, there as well. What's next for the Braves after coming home from New York? Falcons, aftermath of the NFL draft. You'll obviously have some rookie OTA stuff here coming up a little bit too. So you can check out all of that. Find them online at ajc.com for that, and rsandrews.com if you want to get your air conditioning tuned up before the real hot spring and summer gets here. They can get you back to factory fresh specs, keep you cool and comfortable all spring and summer long, and it only costs you $99. So find out more online at rsandrews.com. And we'll see you back here tomorrow, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, across all video platforms. For DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.